God says this message is 100% for you. Watch it. A file has been opened in the courts of heaven, and your name is written across the first page. Not the name people used when they misunderstood you. Not the name your failures tried to carve into your mind. Not the name your exhaustion whispered when you were alone. The name God wrote before the world taught you to shrink. Tonight, something sealed is being brought forward, and it concerns the burden you have been carrying with a straight face. You have treated it like a private weakness, but heaven has treated it like evidence. Evidence of every prayer you swallowed when words became too painful. Evidence of every dream you lowered into the ground because hope began to feel dangerous. Evidence of every season where you kept moving while something inside you was asking whether the promise still had a pulse. This is the secret. The pressure on your life has not only been about survival, it has been pointing to an assignment your old identity could never carry. That is why certain doors closed without a clear explanation. That is why some people could no longer walk with you. That is why peace disappeared from places you once tried to force yourself to belong. God was not decorating your comfort zone. He was dismantling the version of you that would have settled too cheaply. And before this message ends, you will begin to recognize the pattern behind the delay, the ache beneath the silence, and the reason your spirit never fully agreed with the life you were trying to accept. C.S. Lewis once suggested, in the spirit of his Christian reflections, that God often uses discomfort to wake us from shallow sleep, not because he delights in pain, but because love refuses to let the soul remain half alive. So listen carefully. The part of you that feels tired is not the whole story. The part of you that feels hidden is not the final chapter. If your heart knows this word has found the place you rarely speak about, write in the comments, I am listening. Because what heaven reveals next may explain why you were pressed, stripped, delayed, and still preserved. The burden you have been hiding is not as invisible as you thought. You learned how to carry it quietly. You learned how to answer, I'm fine, without letting your voice break. You learned how to keep showing up for people while a silent ache moved through the deepest places of your heart. But heaven has not mistaken your composure for healing. God has seen the difference between the smile you offered to the world and the weight you carried back into the room when no one was watching. This is where the message becomes personal. The place you have tried to cover is the very place God is reaching for first. Not the polished part, not the impressive part, not the version of you that knows how to sound strong, faithful, and unshaken. The hidden part, the tired part, the part that stopped asking because disappointment became too expensive. God says, I am not asking you to perform strength in my presence. I am calling you to bring me the place where your strength ran out. That is the doorway. That is where the healing begins. You may have thought your weariness disqualified you, but the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 33:8. Heaven does not step away from a crushed spirit. Heaven leans closer. There is a kind of pain that does not scream. It simply makes a person quieter. It changes how you pray. It changes how you trust. It makes you cautious with hope. You still believe, but you do not reach with the same innocence. You still love God, but there are rooms inside you that you have quietly locked, because opening them again feels risky. Yet the Spirit of God is standing at that locked place, not with condemnation, not with accusation, but with a holy tenderness that refuses to leave you divided. Think of Hannah, carrying a grief no one around her could fully understand. Her lips moved, but her voice was nearly gone. People misread her pain, but God did not. What looked like weakness in the eyes of others became sacred honesty before heaven. And that is where many people miss the miracle. They think God only responds to polished prayers, beautiful words, clean emotions, and perfect faith. But sometimes the prayer that moves heaven is the one that can barely be spoken. Sometimes the altar is not built in a church aisle, but inside a trembling chest that finally stops pretending. C. Ease. Lewis once wrote in The Problem of Pain that pain insists upon being attended to. He understood that suffering can awaken the soul to realities, comfort kept hidden. This does not mean pain is good in itself. It means God is so merciful that even pain cannot remain useless when placed in His hands. What tried to silence you can become the very place where His voice becomes clear. What made you feel abandoned can become the room where you discover His nearness. So do not despise the burden simply because it is heavy. Do not hide the wound because you think it makes you less chosen. The wound is not your identity, but it may be the place where God begins to reveal your assignment. And if God is touching the wound, then the silence you feared may not be empty at all. There is a silence that feels like rejection until God opens your eyes and lets you see what was being built behind the veil. You thought nothing was happening because nothing was visible. You measured the movement of heaven by the movement of circumstances. And because the door did not open, because the answer did not arrive, because the burden did not lift when you expected it to, you began to wonder whether your name had slipped out of divine attention. But the unseen realm does not operate according to the impatience of human eyes. Some of the deepest works of God are not performed in front of witnesses. They are hidden, sealed, protected, and formed in a quiet place where the noise of people cannot touch them. This is why you could not explain the season you were in. You were not only waiting, you were being guarded from premature exposure. You were not only delayed, you were being separated from voices that would have confused your obedience. You were not only tired, you were being emptied of the false urgency that once made you chase doors God never assigned to you. There are seasons when God closes the curtain, not because the story is over, but because the next act requires sacred preparation. If He had shown you everything too early, fear would have argued with the vision. If He had placed the blessing in your hands before your spirit was steady enough to carry it, the gift itself could have become a weight. If He had answered while you were still attached to the wrong approval, you might have handed your calling to people who were never meant to steward it. So He hid you. He quieted the room. He allowed certain conversations to fade. He let certain invitations disappear. He removed the comfort of constant confirmation, because He was teaching you to recognize His leading without needing applause. And yes, it hurt. It hurt because silence can feel like abandonment when your heart is already bruised. It hurt because you kept looking for proof that you were still chosen, still remembered, still moving towards something that mattered. But heaven was not asking you to prove your worth. Heaven was training your discernment. God says, I was not absent in the quiet. I was removing what would have damaged what I am preparing to release. That is why the old rhythm no longer satisfies you. That is why places that once felt normal now feel too small. That is why certain friendships, habits, ambitions, and patterns suddenly feel heavy on your spirit. It is not because you became difficult. It is because your inner life is being tuned to a higher instruction. Think of Gideon, hidden in an ordinary place, carrying an ordinary fear. seeing himself through the lens of weakness, while heaven addressed the strength buried beneath his own opinion. The divine call did not wait until he felt impressive. It met him in concealment. It found him in limitation. It spoke to the part of him he did not yet believe existed. And this is what is happening with you. The silence is not empty air, it is a chamber of formation. The delay is not wasted time. It is a divine workshop where motives are purified, vision is sharpened, and dependence is rebuilt. You are being taught to stop confusing visibility with fruitfulness. A seed does not announce itself while it is breaking open under the soil. A foundation does not demand applause while it is being laid beneath the house. A crown is not shaped in public. It is hammered in hidden fire before anyone sees it shine. So do not curse the hidden season. Do not interpret the quiet as divine distance. The part of your life that feels unseen may be the very place where God is doing the most exact work. Have you ever felt like heaven went quiet right before your heart almost gave up? If that is you, comment, "The silence is not empty." Let that be your declaration before the next door opens. Because what God hides in silence, He often reveals through a name you forgot you carried. There comes a point when God does not begin by changing the scene around you, because the deeper rescue must happen inside the name you have been carrying. You may have left old rooms, survived old wounds, and outgrown old conversations, yet still answered to a version of yourself created by disappointment. You called yourself late because the door did not open. You called yourself difficult because people misunderstood your depth. You called yourself damaged because pain stayed longer than you expected. But heaven never agreed with those names. God says, "You have been living beneath words I never placed on you." That sentence is not a rebuke, it is a rescue. It is the sound of truth separating you from the language of your injury. You were never meant to become the echo of what hurt you. You were never designed to apologize for the sensitivity that made you notice what others ignored, or for the discernment that made false peace feel unbearable. Think of Ruth, walking away from the familiar with grief behind her and uncertainty ahead. To ordinary eyes, she looked like someone with more loss than promise. But heaven saw loyalty that sorrow could not corrupt, courage that did not need an audience, and a future quietly moving beneath simple obedience. That is how God sees you. He does not reduce you to the chapter that broke your confidence. He does not define you by the people who left before they understood your value. He sees the material of redemption inside what you thought was only ruin. The tenderness in you survived for a reason. The caution in you is being purified into wisdom. The loneliness you endured is being transformed into depth, not bitterness. In the spirit of C is one. Lewis. The false self is often the smaller self we build for approval, safety, and control, while the truer self is found when we surrender to the love of God. That is why this season has felt uncomfortable. God has been removing borrowed names from your soul. He has been loosening the shame that taught you to shrink. He has been calling forward the person who can stand without begging the world to confirm what heaven has already written. You are not the delay. You are not the wound. You are not the unfinished place. You are someone being renamed in the secret place. And when that name rises within you, your posture will change. You will stop chasing rooms that cannot recognize you. You will stop lowering your voice to keep people comfortable. You will stop treating your calling like an accident. Your identity is being rescued from your injury. And once heaven restores your name, it will begin to breathe over the dream you buried. The dream you buried is not dead. It has been lying beneath the surface, waiting for the breath of God to move over it again. You did not bury it because you were careless. You buried it because hoping began to hurt. Every time you looked at it, something in you remembered the door that did not open, the promise that seemed delayed, the people who laughed too early, and the nights when faith felt like standing alone in an empty field. So you stopped speaking about it. You lowered your expectations. You told yourself it was wisdom. But heaven knew it was grief wearing the clothing of maturity. God says, "I have not forgotten what you were too wounded to keep asking for." There are desires in you that were not born from ego or fantasy. Some of them were planted by God before your circumstances became complicated. Some carried the fragrance of purpose before disappointment covered them in dust. Now the Spirit is moving toward that buried place, not to reopen pain, but to reveal that what was placed in God's hands cannot be erased by time. You thought the silence meant the dream had expired. Heaven called it protected. You thought the delay meant you had missed your moment. Heaven guarded the seed from seasons that would have destroyed it too early. Look at the valley of dry bones in Ezekiel's vision. What human eyes saw was final, scattered remains. No movement, no warmth, no future. But when the breath of God entered, what looked finished began to rise. That is the kind of power moving toward the dry places in your life. Not shallow optimism, resurrection breath. The breath that reaches what people have already counted out. The breath that enters what even you stopped defending. This is why you have felt a strange stirring lately. Something you buried has been moving under the soil. A calling you tried to forget has begun pressing against your spirit. A desire you stopped naming has started appearing in your prayers again. Not loudly, but like a small flame returning to a room you thought had gone cold forever. Do not dismiss that stirring. Sometimes God reawakens a dream by first making you uncomfortable with the life you built without it. He lets the old routine feel too narrow. He lets familiar success feel strangely empty. He allows the safe path to lose its taste. Because your soul is being summoned back to what heaven placed inside you. And this time, the dream will not rise in the same form you buried. It will rise purified. It will rise deeper. It will rise with less need for applause and more hunger for obedience. The younger version of you may have wanted the dream for recognition, rescue, or proof. But the version being formed now will carry it as stewardship. That is why waiting was not wasted. It stripped away false motives. It burned through the need to be seen. It taught you that a gift without surrender can become another chain. But a gift returned to God becomes a vessel. So listen carefully. Do not dig up the old dream in panic. Let God breathe over it in peace. Do not force the timeline. Prepare the altar. Do not demand the exact shape you imagined years ago. Ask for the version that carries His presence. What heaven is reviving in you will not merely comfort you, it will require you. And before that buried thing rises fully, God will ask you to place one honest burden into His hands. Tonight, do not only listen to this message, answer it with one simple act of surrender. Not a dramatic performance, not a public display, not a promise spoken from emotion and forgotten when the room becomes quiet again. A real act, a small act, a holy act. Before you sleep, take a piece of paper, open the notes on your phone, or sit with your hands resting over your heart, and bring before God the one thing you have been avoiding. Not the thing that sounds acceptable, not the polished request you know how to pray in front of others. The hidden one, the burden that still tightens your chest when you think about it, the dream you stopped mentioning because hope felt too fragile, the question you pushed down because you were afraid the answer would expose how tired you really are. Write 3 lines. First, Lord, this is the burden I have been hiding. Then name it with honesty. Do not decorate it. Do not explain it perfectly. Just place it there. Second, this is the dream I stopped naming. Let the words come slowly. If your hand trembles, keep writing. If your heart feels guarded, stay there. Third, I place both into your hands, and I choose to listen again. That is the practice. 3 lines. 1, surrender. No noise. No pressure. No need to feel something powerful immediately. God is not measuring the beauty of your wording. He is receiving the truth of your heart. I have learned this through my own walk. Some of the deepest healing does not begin when everything finally makes sense. It begins when we stop hiding from the one who already knows. It begins when we stop treating God like someone who must be protected from our honest pain. You do not need to bring him a cleaned-up version of your soul. Bring him the real place, the unresolved place, the place that still asks why. Then sit in silence for 30 seconds. Breathe slowly. Let your shoulders drop. Say, I surrender the weight. I receive your leading. And after you say it, do not grab the burden back with anxious hands. Leave it there. Even if your emotions need time to follow, even if your mind tries to rehearse the old fear again, this is not magic. This is trust made visible. This is your spirit saying, God, I will not keep building a life around what I refuse to release. Because when you surrender what you hid, heaven begins to turn your private pain into public light. The pain you surrendered does not end with you. That is the part many people do not understand. God does not heal you only so you can breathe easier in private. He heals you until your life becomes a doorway of hope for someone who has forgotten how to believe. What once made you feel ashamed will not always remain hidden in silence. There will come a day when the very place you thought disqualified you becomes the place where someone else recognizes that God still restores broken people. You may think your story is too uneven, too unfinished, too marked by mistakes to be useful. But heaven is not looking for a polished monument. Heaven is forming a living witness. Someone will need the mercy you learned in the dark. Someone will need the patience that was born in your waiting. Someone will need the quiet strength that grew in you when no one clapped. No one understood. And no one came to rescue you quickly. This is why your healing matters. It is not only personal, it is generational. It is not only emotional relief, it is preparation for service. God says, I am turning the place where you were wounded into a lamp others will follow through their own night. Think of Nehemiah. He did not begin with a stage, a title, or a crowd cheering his name. He began with a burden. He heard about broken walls, burned gates, and a city sitting in shame, and something inside him could not remain untouched. That sorrow became direction. That grief became assignment. That ache became a blueprint. In the same way, there are things that break your heart because God has placed a rebuilding grace inside you. You notice certain wounds because you are called to carry wisdom there. You feel certain burdens deeply because heaven has trained your compassion for that exact territory. Do not despise the sensitivity that makes you feel more than others. It may be the very instrument through which God teaches you where to pour light. But hear this clearly. You are not called to bleed endlessly for people. You are called to shine from the place God has healed. There is a difference. One comes from unhealed striving, the other comes from holy overflow. You do not have to prove your calling by exhausting yourself. You do not have to rescue everyone who refuses the light. You simply have to live honestly with what God has done in you. A steady life can preach without shouting. A peaceful response can open a door that arguments never could. A gentle word spoken at the right moment can become shelter for someone collapsing in secret. In the spirit of C. is Lewis. Suffering in God's hands does not merely make the soul tougher, it can make love deeper, clearer, and less self-centered. That is the miracle being formed in you. The enemy wanted pain to make you bitter. God is using it to make you discerning. The enemy wanted delay to make you suspicious. God is using it to make you patient. The enemy wanted rejection to close your heart. God is using it to teach you how to love without begging to be chosen by people. And soon, someone will meet you after this transformation and sense something different. They may not know the whole story. They may never hear every detail. But they will feel the weight of a person who has been with God in hidden places. Who in your life needs the light that God has been building inside you? If one name just came to your heart, right, make me a light, not for attention, not for display, as surrender, because the light you carry will only remain pure if you stop running at the speed of the world. Heaven is teaching you a slower rhythm, because the next door cannot be entered with a frantic spirit. You have spent too long moving as though everything depends on your speed, your control, your ability to fix what hurts before anyone notices you are tired. But God is not training you to run harder. He is training you to listen deeper. The world rewards urgency even when the soul is collapsing. It teaches you to answer quickly. Prove yourself constantly. Chase every open door. Explain every silence. And treat rest as if it were weakness. But the rhythm of God is different. It does not panic. It does not compete. It does not force what must be received by trust. There are blessings that cannot be carried by an anxious heart. Not because God is withholding them cruelly, but because love prepares the vessel before pouring the oil. If your hands are shaking from fear,